Good morning, everybody. So, this is document 1 in the leaflet regarding cities and its many issues. We have discussed in class recently the new urban means of transport, and this is a text that tags along the discussions we've already had on the new forms of urban mobility. The reason I picked up this text is because it deals with innovative and cutting edge ways of moving around in a city, and I wanted you to get used to some concepts such as AI, the Internet of Things, or blockchain that we will discuss a bit later in the slides. First thing, as per usual, is to focus on the title that I will read to you, so how emerging technologies are combining to reshape the mobility sector. Always important is to focus on the keywords here, emerging. Maybe it's time for you to anticipate at this stage what might come along in the text. So emerging technology, I'm thinking about things such as I mentioned earlier, cutting edge technology, state of the art, which means something you put forward as being the most innovative. So what might those technologies be? We don't know yet, but we might imagine this is something maybe in relation to AI. Try to think about emerging technologies. Most of them are resorting to machine learning. They are autonomous as well. So these might be guidelines for you, and you might project already a few ideas upon the text. The next key word, in my view, are combining. They are joining forces. So these technologies, which we haven't identified yet, are trying to rally their forces, to join their forces, to get together. So already we know that those technologies, which are in the plural form anyway, there must be several of them, and that they will work in connection with one another. That's what it means. So far, even though you haven't properly identified what those technologies might be, you already know what the purpose of this is. What are they combining for? They're combining to reshape the mobility sector. Mobility sector, well, it's pretty clear. Mobility sector is like the transport sector. To reshape it is to reorganize maybe the transport system, or even further, to revolutionize this transport sector, or to amend it. To amend it is to transform it. So we know that those technologies will get together in order to change, simply you could say to change the transport system. Imagine maybe a form of smart city in which vehicles are driving on their own, maybe. Right, so you need to make sure you anticipate the content of the article. That will help you understand it a bit better. Sometimes you go in the wrong direction, but most of the time the title is already a very strong indication as to the content of the article. Next is the presentation of the source. I've made a point on this because some of you still struggle to present the document. So something that works pretty well is to say the article under study, the title of which is a really nice way of introducing the title in between. So the article under study, the title of which is, and then you would read it, how emerging technologies are combining to reshape the mobility sector. Try to give it a bit of energy as well. Do not read it as if it was something you had to do as a constraint. So give it a bit of dynamism. So the article under study, the title of which is was posted on. I use the word posted because, as you can see, this is a .com document. So I found this on a website, intelligenttransport.com. This is something you might want to comment upon. Commenting the source is important. Intelligenttransport.com means that it's probably a website promoting those smart technologies in transport. So they will obviously praise, remember that word, they will lavish a lot of compliments on those new technologies. Maybe at the end you can take a step back and be more critical of the arguments that are developed in the article. So posted, if it's a regular newspaper, you obviously use the word published or released. There you go. It was posted on because it's a website. It would be published in or released in for a newspaper. When it comes to the date, something I may have explained before, but be careful. If you mention the day, it would be on the 22nd of January. If you mentioned simply the month, you would say in January 2019. To my mind, it's unnecessary to mention the precise day on which it was released, unless the date had a significance, like it was published on September 11th or on Remembrance Day, or things that are in relation to the contents of the article. But simply giving the month is enough, right? And we don't need many more details on this. The header is the first sentence that will come next in this article. Once again, I keep repeating myself, but both title and header are a strong indication as to what the article is addressing. So I will read it for you, indicating a few bits and bobs as I go along. So Toby Simpson, CTO. A CTO is a Chief Technology Officer. So he's responsible for the technology in the company of Fetch.ai. I'm tempted to say Fetch AI, or Fetch AI is a funny pun, maybe. Fetch AI. Fetch is a word you use usually with dogs when you throw a stick to a dog and it has to go and get it. Say fetch. So it's to go and get something. So Fetch AI. I don't know if that might be a pun, but it might be something that you might keep in mind somewhere. So Toby Simpson, CTO of Fetch.ai, discusses, careful, nothing, you do not discuss on or about, you discuss something. So discusses how technology holds the potential to deliver levels of efficiency that surpass today's centralized platforms in the mobility sector. One word I think is significant in this header is the word surpass. When you surpass, you become better than. You have an edge over someone. Whoops, so I'm back to my slide. To have an edge over someone, to have the better, to have the upper hand is something you could use as well. To have the upper hand. You are superior, basically. To surpass is also to take over. Remember, we discussed this with education, with the middle classes, taking over, surpassing, or catching up with. Catching up with is you may, like, let's say A is here and B is here. It's catching up, which means it's coming to the level of A. If you surpass or overtake, you are getting better than A. So take over would be better. So those technologies that we have mentioned, and this time this is in the singular, so we're talking about the broad concept of technology as a whole, is able, it has the potential, it is able, because it is efficient, it works well, it delivers what it says on the tin, it's taking over, it's better than today's centralized platforms. We don't know exactly what those centralized platforms are, but it seems that at least the structure of the mobility sector seems to be maybe in one block, or at least it seems to be monolithic. It seems to be a bit heavy, and those new technologies will be able to get, as I said, the upper hand. Will be better than the current. I think that's what you might want to say, than the current transport sector. So we know by now that the transportation will be transformed, and possibly with the help of new technologies. We are not probably getting in the wrong direction if we extrapolate on this idea, right? Now, first paragraph that I will read, and I will come back on a few words. So, just 5 years ago, transport and mobility were a simple concept. You drove a car that you owned and manually planned trips based on the mode of transport you were taking. But is a key word in a paragraph, because you are exposed to a situation. The but shows that there will be a paradox, a contradiction, or a change, and this is the case here, but things are changing fast. Notice the be plus ing, which is the gerund form that indicates that this is something that is ongoing at the moment. So what we are being explained here is that it seemed to be fairly simple to take transport before. You planned your trips, possibly with a GPS or a sat-nav. Satellite navigation is called sat-nav in English. And then you planned your route manually, maybe in your car, and then you had to drive your car to to get from A to B. But apparently things are on the move and they are changing. Digital technologies are breaking down the barriers, be careful pronunciation of that word, stress is here, the barriers between different modes of transport, and a host of developers, accent, are completely reimagining what we mean by mobility. I draw your attention to the key word, the subject of this sentence, digital technologies. Once again, what is upsetting, what is changing the current transport system are those digital smart technologies that are possibly related obviously to the internet, and they are breaking down the barriers, they are reimagining. So all of these words indicate that there is a change. So see, this is an emphasis on what we have already explained, that there's a current transformation going on, and the fact that all these verbs are using the progressive present, gerund form, shows that this is a process that is happening right now and that continues, right? We're in the middle of it, it's not over, right? Next paragraph. Bosch's concept for driverless electric shuttles, so this is the name of a company you might know already. Driverless electric shuttles, so several interesting things here. I can see two. I can see this, but I can see this. A shuttle is it's a means of transport that gets you from A to B. Most of the time you would hear it in the context of, for example, landing at an airport, and you would need a shuttle to go from the airport to the city centre. These are regular means of transport to go from A to B once again. So driverless means that it's autonomous. There is no driver. Right? Very useful suffix here. You know that when it's less, it means there is no. Driverless, there is no driver. Homeless, someone who has no home. So driverless, no human driver, right, behind the wheel. Electric. Now we already know that at the moment many vehicles use combustion engine systems. Not a specialist, but that's how you would call it. Now there would be electric, so two ideas, and you know what I'm going to say, when you get two ideas, there's one structure you might want to use, which is not only are those cars not relying or not needing any humans, but they are also eco-friendly. They are electric shuttles, so they present two advantages, which seem to be very interesting. So back to this sentence, Bosch's concept for driverless electric shuttles announced at the 2019 CES conference is a case in point. CES is an acronym for Consumer Electronics Show. So once again, bear in mind, this is a show that promotes electronics. So as the article, which is apparently in favor of smart technology, since this is the point of the website it comes from, the CES conference is an annual show, an annual trade show during which a lot of developers come and sell their digital technologies. Hence the promotion that is being made in this article. Bear this in mind as well. To say that something is a case in point, it's an interesting phrase that you might want to use. To be a case in point means it's the perfect example, the perfect illustration, right? So you would say new technologies are changing the world and autonomous vehicles are a case in point, right? Perfect example. So it might be a very useful phrase for you to learn. The shuttle service is armed with a Wi-Fi connection and packed with screens to benefit the passengers during the completely autonomous journey. Interesting, the word journey is different from obviously a day. A journey is like a trip, right? So this is something you have to remember. Do not use it the wrong way, a journey. So if we describe here the shuttle, this is a description of the shuttle that will be offered to pedestrians. So let's say you want to go from A to B, and then there's this shuttle, which I will represent. I haven't improved my drawing skills, as you can see. So let's say this is a shuttle. It's supposed to be a van, maybe, or a car. Inside this shuttle, it would be equipped with smart connections. You would get Wi-Fi, you would get screens, so that passengers, when they're going from A to B, might benefit from connection. They might use the internet. And it would be completely autonomous, which means no driver once again. In the near future, such a shuttle service would be managed using a software platform that passengers can access via a smartphone app. So not only can you use this shuttle without any driver, that offers you the opportunity of being comfortable and making the most of your Wi-Fi connection, but in the future you can even order your trips or your journeys through your smartphone, through an app. The software handles the complex task of planning the best route from A to B. A to B, whilst checking if anyone else needs a ride along the way. So imagine we're back to, for example, going from the airport to the city centre. Right. In the future, because this is something that apparently is not going on now, obviously it's in the near future, so it's coming very soon, right? Not only could you go from A to B with no driver using a Wi-Fi connection, but it would make sure that it uses the best route. The word route is the best itinerary, which means like maybe the shorter trip or the shorter journey, the less congested one. So it would make your journey obviously more convenient, more efficient. It would avoid traffic jams. This is a word we had seen the other day, traffic jams or congestion or gridlocks. Right. Now, I underlined as well this word. The shuttle would be managed by a software. It would handle maybe the complex tasks. It means that we are projecting ourselves. We're using the conditional because this is not the case now. It's a projection. Don't forget, it's in the near future. So it would do this in an ideal world if it was developed. So we would use this conditional to indicate that we are cut from reality. We are projecting ourselves in a future world in which this would be happening. Now, a strange word for you next is whilst. So back to the sentence, choosing the best route whilst checking if anyone else needs a ride along the way. Whilst is the same as while. It's a more formal way of saying why. It means during the time. Okay, during the time. So as people, or as you are going from A to B, maybe a third person needs a ride. And because your driverless car may be a van taking several people on, then maybe the van would pick up that third person on the way, right? To optimize the way. I suppose to be more accurate, C would be here because they are trying to optimize the journey. So to be exact and accurate, you wouldn't have to go and get C. What would happen is that from A to B, this is a van, C would be on the way. So the car would stop, pick C up and carry on. So you would get more people on this shuttle and it would optimize the number of journeys for individual people. You would put several people on the same shuttle on the same journey. Right. As there is no driver, carrying on here, as there is no driver, passengers are identified when they're picked up using biometric technology built into their smartphone. There is no driver, so you cannot just let anybody get on the shuttle as they please. For somebody to get on, and the person has probably paid online as well, so you can't just let anybody get on as they please. It has to be the person who has ordered the trip on his or her phone. Then they would use biometric. I'm thinking about maybe facial recognition might be once you would identify your face, or maybe on your phone you would, I don't know, use your fingerprint, maybe your digital fingerprint. But they're using technology to identify people, as there is no driver to do this, right? Notice that when you want to give an explanation, instead of saying because there is no driver, which is fine, we like using as. It's a bit better than starting a sentence with because. We would, at the beginning of a sentence, say as there is no driver, and then carry on with the sentence. Right. The next slide, the next part of the text, is listing the reasons why this technology apparently is better, because it replaces humans. And humans are seen as flawed, maybe. Maybe they're not always accurate. Maybe they're not always skilled. Sometimes they may be tired. Sometimes they may get sick. So the advantage, according to this text, is to remove humans from the process of transporting people. So in this example, technology has replaced the role of humans in a host of areas. And this is a list of all the fields in which humans will not be required anymore, in which you can remove humans. You can take humans off the system, off the operating system. Let's see this list of advantages. So the first one is route planning. Remember what we said about planning a route with your GPS or your sat-nav? Now, there is no need for a human to plan the route. Just specify where you want to go. The app or this shuttle is calculating itself the journey it has to take. You don't need yourself to make sure you go through this street and then go there. And then go there. Then the app would take this in charge. The next point is driving. Obviously, nobody's driving the car. Sensors operate within a network and are assisted by powerful algorithms, negating the need for human drivers. This is something you might want to discuss if you had to comment on this during the oral exams, during the commentary. What about this autonomous driving or driverless driving? Driverless driving is a bit strange. Driverless vehicles. Is it such advantageous? Is it so beneficial? Can you rely only on sensors? We know accidents happen. So that's something you need to construct as well as you read this text. Next is car ownership. Right, interesting. It says there is no need to own a depreciating asset that you hardly use when one can be hailed easily and as you need it. 2 words in this sentence. Depreciating assets means that when you buy a car, the minute you leave the car dealer, your car loses value. We say that the moment you start driving your car for the first time, it loses 50% of its value. That's a common say. So if you have a car, first its value will go down. You hardly use it, which means that maybe if you live in an urban environment, you don't use your car all the time. So this is something that sits in your garage and that loses its value, that costs you money. When, instead of doing this, you can easily hail a shuttle or a taxi, like an Uber really. You call out a shuttle on your phone that comes, picks you up, and you don't need to have a car yourself, paying for an insurance, for example, which is something that is mentioned by the end, right? So that's another benefit of using these new technologies in transportation. The other advantages quickly are listed here. Customer service and interaction. There is no need to interact with a taxi company. That's also something you might want to criticize, saying, well, there is no social interaction anymore. Everything takes place on your phone. The payment is automatically taken, much like today, so you pay online, right? Refueling, there is no need to add petrol to your car. You don't need to tank up, is another word we use. Don't need to go to the petrol station, making sure you have enough petrol for your journey, because everything is taken in charge and Eventually, something I've mentioned already, insurance, there is no need to maintain an insurance policy as an individual because this would be part of your fee. Remember this word, a fee is what you pay for your journey. So if you want to go once again from A to B, let's say your journey is £10, then the insurance would be included in your £10. You don't need to take an extra insurance on top of your journey. When you take your car, not only do you have to make sure you've got enough petrol, that you plan your route, that you don't get in the wrong direction, but you need to make sure you're insured. All of this is removed thanks to new technologies. Right. Next paragraph, it's quite a vision and one that is edging ever closer, always closer, which means that when something is edging closer, it's coming closer. To edge is to come progressively. It is becoming closer and closer to the reality, right? In the near future, remember what they said earlier, they think that this will happen maybe in the next few years. As we saw in January 2019, the UK's Law Commission is to assess whether public transport laws should be updated to make it possible for buses to use variable rather than fixed route. Interesting. The Law Commission is a public agency that will evaluate, to assess, to evaluate. Whether is the same as if. They will determine if public transport should be updated, which means the laws regarding public transportation should be changed so that buses, see what I did here? I said so that buses might use variable routes, which means that instead of having always the same route, the bus would use various routes every time it has a journey to go through. So it would never be the same route. Really strange concept, but it would adjust to where people are and the bus would pick people up in the city. That's what it says. So back to this grammar point, to make it possible for buses to use, to make it possible for buses to use variable routes. You could also say so that buses might use. So instead of saying to or for someone to do something or to make it possible, I replace this with this so that, in order to, you would actually say not in order that, but in order to, so that, in the view to, so that buses might use. Be careful, you need this might because a subjunctive is required at this stage in the sentence. Right, so the regulating agencies in Britain are studying the possibility of adding those smart technologies to buses so that, as I explained, the routes might be changed depending on the needs of people who want to take public transport. This would open the door to driverless public transport vehicles, which is something that is all the rage at the moment, to be all the rage, which means it's very trendy and popular, something we've seen already, but I'm refreshing your minds. Fitted with intelligent ride-hailing technology. When buses are fitted with intelligent smart ride-hailing technology, they are equipped, to be fitted with. Ride-hailing, you remember what we said? Hailing is to call for a ride. So this technology helps you call out for a ride as if you were hailing a taxi, right? Remember, you're calling a taxi, as we can see in movies sometimes. The next is the second part, really, of this article. It starts with a title, a very interesting title. It says, technology is experiencing a Cambrian explosion. Cambrian explosion is a phrase we use to indicate a geological period during which, and I'm going to write this down because it's interesting, during which Okay, so which is something you could use like for which, in which, depending on which, according to which, during which, right? During which life emerged. Well, somehow, let me explain. So it marked an important point in history, in the history of life, when the first animals appeared. So we might say, so the very early stages of humanity. And this happened over a very short period of time. So when we say something is a Cambrian explosion, it's basically a revolution. And a very quick revolution happens in the blink of an eye, right? Using technology to find optimal routes that reduce the need for preposition, for high numbers of vehicles to be on the road seems like an obvious solution to the problem of our heavily congested roads. I would like to just indicate to those who struggle with long sentences, there's something you can do is find the main verb in this sentence. If you manage to locate this verb, you get the center of the sentence, because you know that in a sentence, you get the verb, which is like a pillar in the middle of this sentence. That's a mainstay of the sentence. Before comes the subject, and after is the complement. That helps you organize the sentence. So the verb in this sentence is seems. And it's up to you to find the subject, which is quite long, so I have underlined it. Using technology to find optimal routes that reduce the need for high numbers of vehicles to be on the road. That's a long subject. So basically, it's making sure instead of having single... wait a minute, messed up. So I'm going to use my rubber. There you go. So instead of using single occupancy vehicles, you would have a single vehicles for several people. So it's better to have 4 people in a car than 4 cars with a single person in each car, right? So using technology seems like an obvious solution. What I advise you to do is sometimes to remove all of this and really come back to the basics. So using technology seems like an obvious solution. Solution to what? Problem of congested roads. We talked about traffic jams. Instead of having too many cars on the road, then you would have fewer cars. It means less cars, but because you can count the cars 1, 2, 3, we prefer fewer as a word, fewer cars on the road. Notice as well that because this verb is subject of this one, which is the main one, you would have to use the gerund. Using technology seems, not use technology seems, but using technology seems like an obvious solution. So they are here listing the advantages, once again, of using those technologies. We've already seen that apparently one of the main assets of using those technologies is removing humans from the process. But on top of this, it eases congestion in the city centres. Presently, so at the moment, we are in the midst. The midst is another word. Remember we saw whilst earlier, that meant while. Midst means the middle. We're in the middle. Be careful, we use it in a figurative manner. You wouldn't say in the midst of the picture, we say in the middle of the picture. But midst, when it's used in another context, can be used as an equivalent of middle. So at the moment presently we are in the midst of something akin to, remember the word akin to. Akin to means similar to a Cambrian explosion. So they are, coming back to this title, in emerging technology, and it is bringing concepts such as driverless electric vehicles closer than ever. It's a repetition of ideas. We understand that this is on the way, right? This is in the works, and this is probably something that will happen very soon, very shortly. Very soon, very shortly is another word you could use for soon. And this is due to emerging technologies. And once again, you know that I mentioned there were a lot of be plus ing, right? That's because we're in the middle of it, right? This is happening right now. And the completion of this process will be new technologies for public transportation. We're almost there. I will maybe remove part of this paragraph by the end, right? So I will remove this sentence, and I can't remember, but I think in your leaflets you do get an extra paragraph, one or two extra paragraphs at the back of the page you're reading right now. Remove this part because I don't want to dedicate time to this. I really want you to focus on this particular aspect of the article. I don't need the explanations that are made later on. So we're going to stop here, right? So emerging technologies like AI, which is a familiar concept for many of you, artificial intelligence, IoT. IoT is another one that you might have heard about. It's heard of better than heard about. Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is something that we could define as interrelated computing services. Interrelated computing services. What does that mean? That means that data is transferred over a network, and it doesn't require human to human or human to computer interaction. The data goes straight from the point it's collecting to the device or the machine. Think about all the various devices that we are surrounded with, which have sensors. They're transferring this data straight without you having to fiddle with it. So this is the Internet of Things. Is basically the digital world, the smart world, everything that is equipped with an access to the internet, and that doesn't necessarily need your intervention in it. Think about traffic lights, which are in some cities counting the number of cars that are crossing across roads, for example, every single day. This is the Internet of Things. So 3 elements of those emerging technologies. We finally know at this stage in the text what those emerging technologies they kept referring to are. So AI, Internet of Things, and blockchain. Blockchain is something you may have heard with cryptocurrency. Blockchain is like a transaction on a peer-to-peer network that enables encryption. So in a word, it's a safer way. Okay, it's a safer transaction, safer way of exchanging data, information. Most of the time, payment. So encryption is a measure of safety. It goes through multiple networks. You probably know how it works better than I do. And then it avoids somebody hacking the system by using multiple points of data storage. I think that's pretty much how it works. Well, you might correct me in an email if I'm wrong. So emerging technologies like AI, IoT, and blockchain can now be combined in ways we couldn't imagine even a few years ago. So this comes back to the title. We understand that those 3 elements will join forces, or that's a 3, will join forces to completely revolutionize, such as the Cambrian explosion, the transportation system. They will explain. Through the deployment of networked sensors, the IoT delivers unimaginable amounts of real-time data, perfect for feeding AI models so they can make decisions. So you can see this works in conjunction. They are correlated. The Internet of Things gathers data. So a lot of data is collected, harvested every single day on everything you do. Then this data is transferred to AI, which processes it, and even scientists do not exactly know how AI is processing this information. So they give you an example. For example, these decisions from the data can include what speed to drive a car or when to brake. Because if AI is fed with information regarding traffic, then it might adjust the speed of the car or when to stop the car using the sensors and the data it receives. So you understand this is fairly simple. Now, blockchain technology on top of these 2 previous technologies affords an open, secure, and trusted place for data to reside. So it's a way of encrypting the data to make sure that it doesn't roam about, that people cannot, not anybody can access this data. It is being saved on these networks thanks to the blockchain system. This data And I'm going to pause there because data is an interesting term. Data is something that in French translates in the plural. Data is like particulars or details or facts. So you could say particulars. You might want to say features. Right. So this is something that in itself is plural, but we use it in the singular. So as you can see, data is in the text. They would give you this. Data is accessible to the various stakeholders that need it to deliver services. So be very careful. There are a few words in English that works that way. Evidence is another one, because evidence is like you had several proofs or clues, but this is used in the singular, right? And it works the same way with waste. You know what you put in the bin. Usually we think about it in terms of plural, especially because of the French translation, but you would say waste is thrown away everywhere today. Okay, it's thrown away. Da, 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 da. So you would use the singular. There are a few words in English that work that way. So last sentence, the data is accessible to the various stakeholders. Stakeholders, I need my pen, there you go. Stakeholders are people with an interest or a concern in something, especially a business. So the businesses are the people who are interested in this system now, or at least the businesses that will use the data that is collected. The data will be accessible to those people that need to deliver the services. So let's say you are a business that aims at transporting people from A to B. Nobody will be in the car, and yet, in order to deliver this service of going from A to B, you will need the data that is made available through everything we've mentioned. Well, not this one, but especially this one. Something we previously required a multinational company for. Before, big companies, major corporations, had to have a lot of power and money in order to get all this information, have people process this information, transform it into processes and operations, and then have an impact on the transport system. Now everything is done without any human interaction, without any human intervention, and that's why it makes it faster. And you know, the faster, the cheaper. But we might also say the faster, the more convenient. Right. So I hope this article shedded light on these new revolutions that are going on in the urban mobility sector. I will ask you to do something by sending me back your answers by email, is to quickly find the outline of this text. You know, this is something I ask you at the end of the documents we study together. I need a plan, so you might want to go for a 2-part plan or a 3-part plan, depending. Don't forget that exercises accompany this text, so reread this first part of the text. Make sure you learn the vocabulary, you work the grammar. All the corrections are on Padlet for you to verify your answers. There are a few questions as well that you might want to answer to make sure you have understood what this article was about. And your job now is to find the outlines so that you might synthesize or sum up what the main elements